You've had this conversation before. You explained your point carefully. You used the better analogy. You brought the example. You watched them nod, then defend harder. You walked away, drained. They walked away, certain. And for the next 3 hours, you replayed the argument, sharpening the lines you wish you had said. You did not lose the argument. You agreed to have it. Marcus Aurelius governed the largest empire in the human world for almost 20 years. He sat in courtrooms with men who lied to his face. He answered to senators who wanted him dead. He took counsel from generals whose advice served themselves. He woke every morning to the same parade of provocations you face on a smaller scale. He left behind a private notebook. It was never intended for publication. He wrote it in Greek so the people around him could not read it. And the first words of Book 2 of that notebook are a discipline. Not a strategy, not a tactic, a discipline. The exact mental rehearsal he performed before walking out of his bedroom into a day that would try, hour after hour, to take his peace from him. 2,000 years later, you are dealing with the same people he was. The architecture has not changed, and the discipline he used is the one that almost no one practices today, because the world that surrounds you trains you in the opposite direction. By the end of this video, you will understand the 8 laws that govern every frustrating conversation you have ever had. You will see why the people who cannot reach you are not failing to listen. They are doing exactly what their architecture was built to do. And you will know the morning practice the wisest emperor in the historical record performed every day. He understood the one truth most people miss. The only resource you cannot recover is the peace you hand away in a conversation that was never going to land. There is a type of person you cannot reach. You can sit with them for an hour. You can explain the same thing 6 different ways. You can produce the evidence, walk them through the reasoning, anticipate their counter-argument before they raise it. And at the end of the conversation, they will believe what they believed at the start, often more strongly. Because the conversation itself confirmed for them that you were the one who did not understand. This is not their failure. It is the architecture of the human mind. Most positions are not built by reasoning, so they cannot be dismantled by reasoning. Most beliefs are defended because defending them is what holds a self in place. And the moment you challenge one of those beliefs, you are no longer talking to a person. You are talking to a defense. Schopenhauer noticed this in the 1800s and wrote about it with a clarity that has never been improved on. He observed that most people are capable of belief, not thought. That when you reason with them, you are not engaging their mind. You are wrestling with the architecture that protects their position from their mind. Machiavelli noticed something parallel 2 centuries earlier. He saw that the men who held real power did not waste their voice on people who could not be reached. They reserved speech for the moments when it would move the world. The rest of the time, they were silent in a way that other people misread, and the misreading served them. But the deepest answer to this came from Marcus Aurelius, almost 2,000 years ago, in the form of a daily practice that almost no one today performs. 8 laws shape the discipline he taught. By the end, you will know all of them, and you will know the one move that ends every frustrating conversation you will ever have. The move Aurelius made every morning, before the world had a chance to make it for him. In 2016, 2 neuroscientists at the University of Southern California ran an experiment that almost no one outside academic circles has heard of. Sarah Gimbel and Sam Harris took 40 subjects, asked them about their politically held beliefs, then placed them in a brain scanner. While the scanner ran, the researchers presented each subject with arguments contradicting their stated positions. The scans showed something the researchers had expected, but the magnitude was higher than predicted. When a subject's political belief was challenged, the regions that lit up were the ones the brain uses to handle a physical threat. The amygdala, the default mode network, the structures that govern the sense of self. The brain was not processing the contradicting evidence as information. It was processing it as an attack on the self. Schopenhauer understood this 2 centuries before there was a scanner to confirm it. He wrote that the common man is capable of belief, not of thought. That when a position is held emotionally, it cannot be examined intellectually, because the moment of examination is the moment of perceived danger. The defense engages before the reasoning has a chance to begin. This is why your most careful argument bounces off your sister's politics. Why your evidence does not move your colleague's opinion of you. Why the conversation you keep replaying in your head goes the same way every time. You are not arguing with their mind. You are arguing with their defense. And the defense has only one job, which is to remain standing. The shape of this is the same across every subject that contains identity. Politics, religion, parenting choices, investment positions, the opinion of one's own intelligence. Any belief that has been held long enough to fuse with the self produces this same scan pattern. The defense does not distinguish between a stranger arguing in good faith and a manipulator twisting words. It treats both as the same event, because the defense cannot tell them apart. It has only the one job. Marcus Aurelius opened the second book of his Meditations with this in mind. Every morning, before stepping out of his rooms, he would rehearse the kinds of people he was about to meet. The ungrateful, the arrogant, the dishonest, the envious. He was not insulting them. He was preparing himself, because his discipline was that he could not be undone by a thing he had already accepted as part of the day. You are not arguing with their mind. You are arguing with their defense. You have done this. You walked into the conversation with the better evidence, the clearer source, the numbers, the screenshots, the citation. You watched the other person ignore all of it and keep believing the opposite. And on the way out, you told yourself, if I had only explained it slightly differently, they would have heard me. They would not have. Logic cannot pick a lock that was never set by logic. A Yale legal scholar named Dan Kahan spent 2 decades testing whether better information produces better beliefs. The answer he kept finding was no. In his best-known study, he gave people a politically charged data set and asked them to interpret it mathematically. The participants with strong numerical skills were sharp when the data confirmed their politics. They were worse than chance when the data contradicted them. The skill that should have protected them made it worse. They were more sophisticated at building a case for the conclusion their identity had already chosen. Kahan called this identity protective cognition. The mind is not searching for the truth. It is searching for a defensible route to the answer the self has already committed to. There is something specific to notice here. The smarter the person, the more elegant their motivated reasoning. The better educated, the higher the credentials, the more convincing the defense they can construct for a conclusion that was never actually up for review. Being correct is not the advantage we assume it is. Being correct only matters if you are talking to a person whose position was reached by being correct. Schopenhauer named the same pattern 150 years earlier, in shorter words. Reason serves the will, not the other way around. The will picks the destination. The reasoning is hired afterwards to defend the route. To the person doing it, it feels exactly like thinking. The order of operations is reversed, and they cannot tell. This is why your most careful argument does nothing. The position you are arguing against was not assembled by reasoning. It was assembled by belonging, by inheritance, by emotion, by what the other person needs to be trues in order to stay who they are. You are sliding a precise key into a lock that does not have a corresponding pin. The wise stopped trying, not because they gave up, because they understood the architecture and refused to keep using the wrong tool. They reserved their reasoning for the small number of people whose positions were actually built by reasoning. The rest of the room was always going to hold the views the room was always going to hold. Logic cannot pick a lock that was never set by logic. Schopenhauer once observed that an honest mind in argument with a dishonest one is always at a disadvantage. The dishonest mind can use any tool. The honest mind is limited to truthful ones. The longer the argument continues, the more the honest mind is forced to either descend or withdraw. Most people descend. Imagine you have been arguing with a family member for 30 minutes. The argument started over something specific, a decision, a claim, a small disagreement. By minute 15, you were no longer talking about the original issue. By minute 20, you were defending your character. By minute 25, you were producing examples from 3 years ago. By minute 30, you said a sentence you do not entirely recognize as yours, sharper than you meant it, and as soon as it left your mouth, you understood. The version of you that walked into the conversation an hour ago is not the version walking out. That is the descent. Your character was the cost of the conversation, not the conclusion, not the relationship, the actual texture of who you are, slightly downgraded for the rest of the evening. The wise know this happens. They know that the longer they engage, the more the engagement reshapes them. Aurelius wrote that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. Schopenhauer warned that prolonged conflict with the unreasonable will make the reasonable unreasonable, given enough time. The dynamic is mechanical. It does not require either party to be wicked. It only requires the engagement to continue. You can watch this happen in real time on any social platform. A thoughtful person enters a thread with a careful observation. They meet a bad faith reply. They sharpen back. By the 10th exchange, the original careful position has been replaced by a defensive one the poster does not entirely recognize as theirs. The thread is documented. They cannot delete it later without conceding the dissent. They have been recolored by the engagement. This is why the wise will leave a conversation that other people stay in. Not because they cannot defend their position, because they have measured the cost of defending it and decided that the defense is more expensive than the position is worth. The person you become while winning the argument is the person you have to live with afterwards. You did not lose the argument. You lost the version of yourself who would not have it. Here is the rebuttal you will be making in your head right now. But if I do not respond, they win. If I do not answer the lie stands. If I do not correct the misrepresentation, my silence will be taken as agreement. If I let the comment pass, the room will think the comment was true. This is the law that is hardest to accept, because it requires you to make peace with a thing you cannot control. When you stay silent, the people watching will read your silence through their own need. The person who wants you to be wrong will read it as defeat. The person who wants you to be powerful will read it as power. The person who wanted you to agree will read it as agreement. The person who is uncertain will read whatever the most confident voice in the room tells them to read. This is also true of explanation. The reader who needs you to be wrong will extract the sentence that confirms what they already thought. The reader who needs you to be defensive will read the entire paragraph as defensive. Words do not arrive at the listener unmarked any more than silence does. The misreading was waiting before you ever opened your mouth. Your silence does not arrive at the listener unmarked. It arrives wearing the costume the listener was already preparing for it. This is why explaining yourself a second time does not help. By the time a person has misread your silence, they have built a small narrative around the misreading, and that narrative now needs defending. Your additional words are entering a courtroom where the verdict was already announced before you spoke. Aurelius wrote, "What is in your power is your assent. Nothing more. Not what other people think. Not what they say at dinners you are not attending. Not what the misreading does to the version of you that lives in their head. That version is not yours. You did not write it. You cannot rewrite it by speaking. They will read your silence the way they need to." The wise stopped contesting the reading. They held the peace. The misreading went where it goes, which is mostly nowhere, and the conversations that actually moved their lives forward continued with the people who could read accurately. They will misread your silence. That is not silence's problem. Those were the 4 laws that describe why you cannot reach them. The next 4 describe what you do instead. Not strategy, not revenge, not the cold revenge fantasy that has become the entire content of the dark psychology corner of the internet. Every video there instructs you to ignore your enemies until they destroy themselves. That is not the discipline. That is the same reaction as before, dressed in different clothing. What follows is harder than reaction and harder than vengeance, because it requires you to govern the one part of the situation that is actually yours. Your own response. Aurelius spent 20 years on this and called it the work of a lifetime. We have 4 laws and about 15 minutes. The discipline is not silence. The discipline is not the absence of reaction. People who hear about the Stoic tradition often reach for the wrong picture, an image of a stone-faced person absorbing insult without registering it. That is not what Aurelius taught. That is the imitation of the discipline by people who have not read it. The actual discipline is a question, asked between the provocation and the response. One question, deployed in a gap most people do not know is available to them. What does my reacting accomplish? Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The strength he meant was not the strength to suppress the reaction. It was the strength to insert 1 second between the provocation and the response. To ask, with absolute honesty, what the reaction will achieve. Most reactions do not survive this question. The insult you were about to answer was not going to be changed by your answer. The misreading you were about to correct was going to be repeated regardless of the correction. The argument you were about to enter was going to end exactly where the architecture of the other person's position required it to end. The reaction was going to spend an hour of your evening, a layer of your peace, and the texture of your night. And it was going to accomplish nothing the silence would not have accomplished by simply allowing the moment to pass. This is not suppression. The reaction still rises in you. The question does not erase it. The question metabolizes it. You feel the heat, you ask the question, and you watch most of the heat answer the question for you by becoming visibly pointless. What survives the question is a very small set of reactions, the ones that will actually move something, the conversation with the person who can be reached, the boundary that has to be set with the person who keeps testing it, the correction that will travel because the audience is the kind that listens, the hard truth told to the friend who can hear it, the piece of feedback delivered to the colleague who can actually use it. The wise have not turned cold. They have refused to spend their finite reactions on conversations that would burn them for no return. The question, what does my reacting accomplish, is the one most reactions never survive. The opening of Book 2 of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is not a meditation. It is a script, almost a litany. He wrote it for himself to read each morning before the day began. Say to yourself in the early morning, I shall meet today inquisitive, ungrateful, arrogant, treacherous, envious, unsocial men. All of these things have come upon them through ignorance of what is good and evil. This is the practice almost no one performs and almost everyone needs. You wake up and the first 30 minutes of your day are reactive. You check your phone, you scan an email, you see a message that lands wrong. You read a comment that did not have to be made. And by the time you have stood up, brushed your teeth, and made coffee, your nervous system is already metabolizing 3 or 4 small provocations. The architecture of the day will multiply them. The provocations were going to happen anyway. The architecture has not changed for 2,000 years. What Aurelius did, before the architecture had a chance to ambush him, was to walk through the day's likely provocations in advance, not to make himself bitter, to inoculate himself. By the time the dishonest senator said the dishonest thing, he had already met that senator in his mind at dawn. The provocation arrived not as a surprise, but as an expected weather pattern. His nervous system had already absorbed the shock. The reaction had already been metabolized before the cause arrived. This is the difference between being unbothered as a personality and being unbothered as a practice. People who appear unbothered without practicing it are usually performing. They are still being torn by the same provocations, just below the surface, with the same nightly cost. The ones who have practiced this for years are not performing. They have actually rehearsed the day's idiots before the idiots arrived, and the idiots cannot ambush a person who has already shaken their hand at dawn. If you do not see this law, you will keep being surprised by the same provocations over and over, and the surprise itself is the thing draining you. Watch what happens when you wake tomorrow. Before you check your phone, ask yourself, what kinds of people am I going to encounter today? What will they likely try to take from me? 5 minutes, no notebook required, just the rehearsal. What you rehearsed at dawn cannot ambush you at noon. Not everyone who provokes you is the same. The wise have learned to read the difference. The response that works for one is wasted on another, and the response that works for the third is forbidden to the first. The first kind is the unaware provocateur. They do not know they are doing it. The colleague who interrupts you in meetings does not realize they interrupt. The relative who asks the wounding question genuinely does not see the wound. The friend who borrows energy and never returns it cannot see the imbalance because the imbalance has been their normal for as long as they have been alive. They are not malicious. They are operating without a mirror. With this person, the response that works is the slow, neutral, repeated naming of the pattern. Not anger, not retreat. Just calm fact, delivered the third or fourth time it appears. With the patience of a person who knows, the awareness will arrive only after enough deliveries. The second kind is the deliberate provocateur. They know exactly what they are doing. They have chosen the comment, the framing, the timing. They are testing what they can extract from you and how much of your piece they can convert into their entertainment. With this person, naming the pattern does nothing. They already know it. The response that works is the one that removes their access to your reaction without explaining why. No statement, no confrontation, no final word. Just the door, quietly closing, on a relationship that did not deserve the explanation it never asked for in good faith. The third kind is the broken provocateur. They cannot help it. Something in their history has left them with no other way to seek contact. The provocation is the only relational tool they have. Often this is a parent who provoked you for 30 years and could not have done it differently. Often this is a sibling who learned in childhood that conflict was the only way to be noticed. With this person, the only response that does not destroy you is mercy paired with distance. You do not engage and you do not condemn. You hold them at the radius where you can still love them and they cannot still drain you. This taxonomy will not solve the people in your life. It will only show you that the same silence reads differently depending on whose face is in front of you. The same silence reads as kindness, as power, and as mercy depending on whose face is in front of you. Marcus Aurelius governed Rome through a plague that killed roughly 5 million people, multiple wars on the frontier, a civil revolt led by one of his own generals, a court that contained men he could not entirely trust. His private notebook reads as the work of a man who had absorbed all of this without becoming bitter, vengeful, or theatrical about any of it. The Romans who watched him at the time did not all see this clearly. Many of them found him cold, distant, hard to read, too philosophical. They wanted an emperor who reacted, who showed them what he felt, who fought back visibly when slighted. They could not see that what he was doing was the opposite of cold. He was holding a peace they did not have the tools to recognize, and from the outside it looked like absence. This is the cost of the discipline. When you stop reacting on the schedule other people expect you to react on, some of the people in your life will not call you unbothered. They will call you cold. They will call you distant. They will say, "You have changed." They will mean it as a complaint. They will sometimes mean it as a wound. Some of those readings will be wrong. You will know they are wrong. And there will be no way to correct them without stepping back into the very pattern you have just stepped out of. The wise have decided that the misreading is the cost of the piece, and they pay the cost. They do not explain. They do not relitigate. They do not perform a softer version of themselves to make the people who liked the older, more reactive version feel comfortable again. You will lose a few relationships to this. Most of them will be relationships that were built on the version of you that was constantly being drained, and that version was never going to last anyway. The relationships that remain will be the ones that can hold a quieter, harder, more peaceful person without needing to test whether the old reactivity is still available somewhere underneath. If you do not see this law, you will keep apologizing for becoming someone you should not have to apologize for. Watch what happens the first time a person who used to drain you tells you that you have become distant. Notice the half second in which you almost reach for an explanation. Notice the second half second in which you remember that the explanation would simply reopen the conversation that you had finally allowed to close. They will call you cold. The peace you have is what they meant to compliment. 8 laws. They defend, they do not reason. Logic is not the key to a lock that was never set by logic. Every argument descends to its lowest participant. Silence is misread through the reader's need. The discipline is the question before the reaction. The morning rehearsal absorbs the day's provocations before they arrive. 3 kinds of provocateur require 3 different ways of not responding. And the cost of being unbothered is being misread as cold, which is the cost the wise have decided to pay. Marcus Aurelius wrote one line in his private notebook that contains the whole of this. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wrote it to himself, in the 2nd century after the Common Era, surrounded by people who wanted to drain him. The line carried him through 20 years of a job that has destroyed almost every other person who has held it. The discipline he was practicing is not lighter than reaction. It is heavier. It costs more in the short term than answering would cost. The hour you would have spent winning the argument is now an hour you spend, with the residual heat of having walked away. You feel the heat. The discipline did not erase it. The discipline only refused to let you spend it. You have just spent 30 minutes watching a video about a practice that most people will refuse before the end of the first day they try it. The architecture that surrounds you is not arranged to support this practice. The relationships that surround you are not arranged to support it either. Your own nervous system, trained on 20 or 30 or 40 years of reactive habit, will fight the practice for weeks. Most viewers will close this video and within the hour will be back inside an argument they did not have to have. That is the pattern. The pattern is what the 8 laws describe, but the laws do not run on you in the same way anymore. Not because you are smarter than the people running them, but because you have just spent 30 minutes naming them. The naming is the only thing that creates the gap. Aurelius's whole practice depends on the gap. The gap is the only territory that is yours. So here is the practice. This week, pick one conversation you keep replaying in your head, the one that drained you the most. Sit with it for 10 minutes and walk through the 8 laws against it. Which defense were you arguing with? Which lock did your logic fail to pick? How far did you descend? Who misread which silence? What question did you skip? What rehearsal did you not perform? Which of the 3 kinds of provocateur were you talking to? And what cost did you refuse to pay that you might have paid? Then do not replay the conversation again. Let it close. If this is the kind of thinking you came here for, subscribe. The Dark Playbook goes deep on the philosophy and psychology behind how humans actually behave. Every week. Not how we wish we behaved, how we actually do.